Hi, this is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with, also I've asked you if this video or any of the other videos that I've made on my YouTube channel are beneficial. Subscribe to the channel and please share it. I think there's a lot of good information that we've been disseminating, and I think it's very much beneficial to all those who will listen, especially in this time in the season that we live in America. I think it's important for us to really be able to frame the narrative based on what's right and what's fair, and not based on simply emotional response. Being woke, as the title talks about, this is also part of the series. I've been talking about white supremacy and what it represents. But I want to start off talking about the foundation. Most of the people who are the power behind the scenes. So when we describe them as simply as white supremacy, it means we don't fully understand who they are, and really understand the kind of the strategy that's being employed, right? So anyway, most modern philosophy comes from the Greek philosophers. Now, people will argue that the Greeks stole a lot of their philosophy from ancient Babylon, or from the Egyptians, or some of the people in the ancient world, and I would agree with you. But for the sake of our talk, we're going to Plato in particular. So Plato is a famous philosopher from Greek philosopher. He wrote Plato's Republic, and in it he came up with this idea of what they call philosopher king. And so philosopher king are the people that they believe should rule over the rest of humanity. Now, from a biblical context, that goes back to Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden. We call philosopher kings believe that because of their knowledge or gnosis that they have, their secret knowledge, or the information that they carry, or their intellect, that they have should be ruling over humanity. They believe that in order for us to have a utopian society, you have to have these philosopher kings to rule over the rest of the people, and that most people are unenlightened or not able to rule over themselves. And then it will help you in the conversation. Now, when you had what in Europe was also known as the Age of Enlightenment, and you had some philosophers that came from that, you had this, and most of it came from, so when you look at the psychologists that started to perfect the idea or the study of psychology, which was studying the human brain. When you look at some of the other German philosophers, they had this certain thing called German idealism. There are people like, and you'll hear me reference Hegel sometimes, George Wilhelm Hegel, which is where you get or another way to put it is problem, reaction, and solution. And so these ruling elite class people, many times, in order for them to sway public opinion in a certain way, and we'll talk about this a little bit, they thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which means they have a ultimate goal that they want to, or ultimate direction that they want to take society in. And so what they do is they come up with a problem, right? And they come up with the problem, they anticipate the reaction, and then they offer a solution. And I set your house on fire, right? If I set your house on fire, I wanted to sell water, my ultimate goal is to sell you water. So I would anticipate you would come out of your house and say, hey, I need some water to put this fire out. And then I would be there with the water. Some of the other things that have been used to move the tools that they use, these people that are the ruling class people. Now, the other thing with German idealism, and I mentioned Hegel and Kant and some of these other people, if you get a chance to look them up, they came a person who was using the words. And so you move into what's known as postmodernism. You move into what is known as that there is no absolute truth and everything is subjective. And that's how they, morals and values. Most of us who are adhere to like a biblical worldview believe that there is absolute truth. We believe that the word of God is absolute truth. But these people would promote the idea that there's no absolute truth. And some of these philosophers, even when you read the Apostle Paul, when he was on Mars Hill, he would have been talking to people that would sit around, and some of these philosophers, they would philosophize about everything. And it's a thing called dialectic and rhetoric. And what they did is they believed that if you brought the best case or the best argument about a point, then you must be right. And so they didn't believe in absolute truth. It was kind of very vague in their belief system. Also, it was very abstract. And so when you think about the Greek mindset in the Western world, it becomes this very abstract coming to play even in this day. Now, from this kind of idea, German idealism and different things, you have these other philosophers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And Marx was also someone who believed to be a philosopher king. Now, just to put things in context now, and you hear a lot nowadays about Karl Marx or Marxism, you know, communism and socialism are offshoots or like kind of the same. They are different branches of the same tree. So Karl Marx was a philosopher king to a certain degree. And just so you know a little bit about Karl Marx, he was a horrible human being. He was a horrible person. He never really had a real job. He just went around and philosophized all the time. He left his wife and children destitute, and basically his kids died of hunger and froze to death. His wife was homeless. He was just around that he could have the solution for society's ills. And it's kind of sad because people that follow after this Marxist ideology, the very liberal left, of course, especially, they follow after this kind of Marxism, but it's not practical, and it actually ignores the basic principles of humanity, of how human beings operate. Philosophies that we're talking about. And so they believe, because of this philosopher king idea, that they are the ones who have the right to rule over society, and mostly they do it behind the scenes realms of society. You know, so Plato had this idea of philosopher king in Plato's Republic, and they would be kind of behind the scenes. They're the power structure behind the scenes, but on the front end you had entertainers, and you had philosopher kings, and so that philosophy is still held to those who now we call these the ruling elite class. And when you think about entertainers, you think about not only those who sing and act, but nowadays in America, I would submit to you that the media have become entertainers. Media personalities have become entertainers, especially when you have a 24-hour, but that script is being employed to shape public opinion. And so these people that are supposed to be journalists in the news aren't journalists anymore, but they're opinionists. They are editorialists, if you will, and they are giving you an opinion, which is why it's called broadcasting and television. Because they are actually, it's a certain form of witchcraft or spell casting when they sway public opinion by giving a narrative that leads the public in a certain direction. And so, of course, when we talk about Marx and Stalin, and I'll move through this kind of quickly, but I need to lay this foundation. And if you want to go and check my references or kind of study or understand about these people, I think it'd be very beneficial. So you have Karl Marx, you have Joseph Stalin, Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, and the like. And what they did is they believed that they should be the Russians that overthrew the czars, which was these, you know, you had monarchs in Europe. So you have the Russians, the communists that overthrew the Russian czars in a violent revolution. And you also have, you know, that's what created the communist state of Russia. And later on, you know, you had the communist Chinese. They had a violent overthrow, and it was reported, like in Russia, I think it might have been 20 million Russians that were killed. The CCP or the communist China, when they overthrew the government of China, it was reported that all in all, maybe 50 million Chinese people were murdered or massacred because of the communist overthrow. And then you also had in Germany, the communists and the Nazis, they teamed up to overthrow the Democratic Party in Germany. But later the Nazis were able to dispel the communists and to gain power in Germany. And so, of course, we know Hitler and the Nazis took over Germany, and this is history. This is all the same philosophy of this idea of a philosopher king. But eventually, initially, like I said, there were violent overthrows. And then something happened around the early part of the 20th century in Germany with the Frankfurt School. So the Frankfurt School, I'm sorry, let me digress. First, you had this kind of an organization called the Order of the Illuminati that was started in Germany as well in the 1700s. Adam Weishaupt was the head of the German Illuminati. And so, of course, you had these philosopher kings, but what they did is they began to organize influence leaders in various realms of education, arts and entertainment, sciences, and influencers, right? Public influencers. So what they would do is they would bring them in and they would use them in order to promote their agenda. And usually they would gain much wealth. These are strategies that they use even to this day. So then after the Illuminati was discovered, and many of these European countries actually made laws that said they were illegal because they understood their overall agenda. So what they did was they made them illegal. So they took on a different strategy, and they started this thing in 1913 called the Frankfurt School in Germany, and it was what's called a think tank. And they would come with strategies and ideas in order to promote them. They saw the violence and the violent overthrow, but they also understood that because of the Industrial Revolution, that the population were exploding and the standard of living for people was really improving. And so they began to come up with strategies. Instead of trying to have these violent overthrows, they were coming up with what is known as revolutions without bloodshed, or revolution without, in order to social engineer the public. And and again, they recognize the benefits of having a revolution without bloodshed, because you know that the communists in Russia, communist overthrows, even in Cuba when Fidel Castro took power, Che Rivera, a lot of times they were very violent. It was guerrilla warfare, and there was a lot of violence and a lot of death because of it. And so with these philosophers began to come up with strategies on how to social engineer the public in order to gain power. One of the way that changes the public's opinion in order to make their agenda more acceptable. So they use the media, and the Germans perfected what's known as propaganda. Edward Bernays was the father of what's known as modern propaganda. They now call it public relations and marketing and advertising, but they use the media in a way to change public opinion and to shape language. And so that's where you get the whole idea of political correctness. Political correctness was actually created through these think tanks in a way to engineer public opinion. And during the period of Enlightenment, they studied psychology and how the human brain works. And they understood that most people are very much, it's like a herd mentality. They call it groupthink. And so when they promote the idea that everybody else thinks a certain way, popular opinion, popular culture was created by them. And it's easier to get people to accept their premise under the guise that everybody else feels the same way, because the average person doesn't want to go against the grain. So if there's 100 people in a group and I'm the only one, and I believe that 99 or 90% or 90, but they know and understood that it has a huge influence on how I perceive these things. And so they began to social engineer things and political correctness. So you couldn't say certain things. It is reported that the word anti-Semitic comes from these groups of people as a way to get people not to criticize some of the things that were happening behind the scenes and some of these other things. And you'll see that nowadays it's becoming very, very prevalent with the censorship and cancel culture, with political correctness. Those are all strategies of the ruling elite in order to sway public opinion. So the things that you used to be able to say before, you can't say now. Hey, Adam Guidry, how you doing? Good to see you, brother. So the things that you used to be able to say, like let me give you an example. Let me give you a very generic example. If a person had a learning disability years ago, they would say that that person is retarded, right? Now, retarded is actually a scientific term. It means that your thinking or your processes are slowed or impeded, right? It's not a negative or a positive. It's supposed to be like a medical term, like a medical term, like words like idiot or imbecile or something like that. Those were actual designations, right? And was based on science or person's IQ or their ability or lack of ability to process information. But nowadays, if you use the word retarded, or if you use the word handicap or something like that, they'll say that's not political correct, and you may be subjected to what's known as cancel culture, and you can't say these words. But they begin to do that to shape language, because when they shape and change language, it actually changes the way people perceive and to think about certain things. And so they were very strategic in doing that. Now, in Europe, when they began to perfect these things, these think tanks and everything else. So let me give you this real quick. So you had the Nazis They perfected a lot of these things, and actually the Nazis were very effective at even overthrowing or pushing the communists out of Germany, because Karl Marx and these people were actually German, but it was in Russia where they communist Russia. So now World War II comes. You know, the American and the Allies, they go to war, they win the war, and they split Germany in half. So Russia takes East Germany and the Soviet Union, and America takes West Germany, and they're in control of the Western European places. But they also, what they did when they went into Germany, they actually seized a lot of the Nazi scientists and a lot of the strategies and schemes that were used by the Nazis. They brought it to America and they employed it. And you have the fact that the Rockefeller and the Rockefeller Foundation actually funded some of the Nazi things. Joseph Goebbels, Mengele, Joseph Mengele, who did a lot of experiments on eugenics and different things like that, was actually funded by the Rockefeller family. You had Joseph Goebbels was the minister of propaganda. And one of the strategies that he came up with, or one of the sayings he came up with, and modern media kind of uses long enough, people will believe it. And then if you repeat it even longer, you will believe it as well. And so they came up with this idea that even if something was false, they would just say it over and over again, put it in the media, and eventually people would take it as being true. That is a specific strategy that was employed by them. It's not a coincidence. It is something that they recognize through studying human psychology. But when they began to try to take over, they recognized that the biggest hindrance to them taking over the world, the one world governmental system, if you will, the New World Order that they were trying to employ, the biggest hindrance to that was the Judeo-Christian Western world. The Judeo-Christian Western world. So Western Europe, Great Britain, and the United States, because of the Judeo-Christian foundation of these regions, they realized that it was nearly impossible for them to employ their plan of the revolution without bloodshed until they eroded at the Judeo-Christian Western culture. Right now, at first they started to do it. They tried to do it through military means, right? So you had the Russians. First you had the Nazis, right? They wanted to do it by violent overthrow. They were defeated by the Allies, right? United States and their allies. Then you had the Cold War after that, where Russia, of course, the Soviet Union fell apart, right? So they recognized that they weren't be able to win that battle because of the military might of the Western world, especially the United States. And so what happens is they realized that they needed to erode the Judeo-Christian Western world, Western culture, in order for them to seize control. Now, there's a thing called critical theory. Now, critical theory, of course, you hear me say about critical race theory, and I'll explain that. But the foundation of critical race theory is critical theory. Critical theory was one of the strategies, along with political correctness, that they developed in the Tavistock Institute to erode at the foundational institutions of the Judeo-Christian Western world. So traditional beliefs like gender roles, sexuality, and even basic morality were all challenged in order to weaken the fabric of the Western culture. Now, what do I mean by that? So nowadays you hear them talk about toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity falls under the umbrella of critical theory, where they are trying to destroy traditional gender roles and tell you that it's evil if a man is masculine, right? They try to feminize men. What's called the second wave feminist movement also was one of these tactics that they use. And it wasn't about women's equality. It was about emasculating. The hippie movement was created by the same ideology. You had Timothy Leary at Harvard University that promoted the idea of using drugs and psychotropic drugs. The hippie movement was also promoted as a way to destroy traditional values and family values. It even caused the rebellious young people to rebel against their elders. And so even in America nowadays, you don't have the same respect for elders as you did traditionally, right? And this whole idea through the media and different things. And if you want to see one of the greatest examples is a psyop. I'll just let you know, Disney is a psyop. Walt Disney worked with the CIA in the past with the Project MK Ultra, which is monarch programming and mind control. And one of the things that Disney does is Disney erodes at the basic family values. So think about all the Disney shows that you saw, whether it was Hannah Montana or some of these other Disney shows, and started in the parents. Usually the father is like the big dolt. He's like the dumbest one in the family. So even the children sometimes work together in cahoots with the mother to get things over on the father. The dad is really kind of like the dumb person. And these are all, they're very subtle, but it's meant to erode the traditional gender, right? I've even had kids that say that. Well, we know more than our parents do, because it's this idea that's promoted, and it's to instill rebellion in our young people, right? Those are intentional. But basically, what this does with critical theory, it criticizes the basic strategy was to enhance the racial divide and incite riots and racial unrest. And that was very prevalent even during the civil rights movement. They would hijack the civil rights movement to cause more racial unrest, to enhance racial unrest. Yep, absolutely, Adam. Sexuality in our young children, younger age, sorcery, witchcraft, the breakdown of gender roles, and yeah, they promote a whole lot of that stuff. And so I always tell people to be careful. Don't let your kids watch Disney if you can help it. Well, you can help it, but I would strongly suggest you don't let your kids watch Disney. Because it is very, it's subtle. It's a form of programming that they're doing. It's very subtle, and most people may not even see it unless you point it out, unless it's pointed out to them. So anyway, when we talk about the racial divide, and it was reported very much so. So you had J. Edgar Hoover and these other people that realized that the Marxists and the communists had infiltrated the civil rights movement. And so a lot of times they would send people in to incite riots. They would stir things up. They would enhance, or they would even amplify any type of racial confrontation or anything like that. And they didn't do it to help people of color or help the minorities. They did it to destabilize the country, the Western world, so that they could come in and take over. So critical race theory goes under the thing of critical theory. And what it does is it basically says that I'm talking about these global elite people, these ruling elite class people. It's about their group of people, the very, I would say that like white people any more or less than black people. It's all about money. And the second thing they care about, first thing they care about is money and resources. The second thing that they care about are those people that can help them to promote their agenda, to keep themselves in power, and to help them make money. Right. So if you're a moneymaker, you get invited to one of these secret societies, you get initiated into them, whether you're a Hollywood star, a musician, a politician, a business person, you get initiated into these one of these the subcultures of this ruling elite class. And then you make money. They give you all the money you want as long as you keep making money and helping them to promote their agenda, which is why you look in Hollywood now. All the Hollywood people are pretty much on the same page. They're promoting the LGBTQ. They're promoting marginalize it. They make fun and mock you. They mock Jesus and the Bible and these type of things. And a lot of times they'll use the word God, but they're using it out of context because their God is the God of this world and not the God of the Bible. So anyway, let's talk about wokeism and critical race theory. So woke is a term that's come into the mainstream recently, and it originally was more specific to the African American culture. Right. Term refers to the awareness of social justice and in particular racial issues. The woke movement began in the African American community and the acceptance of Black liberation theology, another name for Marxism. So all these are all based in Marxism. The movement has expanded into other perceived social justice areas. And in brief, woke is a term used to explain an awakening to issues of race. It was originally just race. Now it's gender and sexual injustice. Now, the reason I need you to understand how this ties into Marxism, because Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, when they wrote the Communist Manifesto, they did it is not the sign of Black pride. It was the Black people adopted it, but it's actually the symbol of communism, solidarity, workers of the world unite. And if you see, there's a flag that has, I think it's Vladimir Lenin who's holding up this sign. That's what it's about. It's about Marxism, communism. But of course, what they do is they promote the idea that they're trying to help the underdog to overcome the oppressor. And so they use that in Russia to get the people, the masses, to go along with it, to overthrow the czars and the monarchy, right? And now they use it in America. Primarily, they began using it to black people, for black people, saying, we're trying to help you to overcome the man, right? But they really were hijacking the movement simply to destabilize the country. Now you have the LGBTQ stuff. So what they do, part of what they do, stemming from German idealism categories. So what this critical theory does is it pits people against each other. So they tell women that the reason that you women are black people, it's white people always is your problem. It doesn't matter what you've done or what choices you make. Every bad thing happens because of white supremacy. They tell gay people it's they call it heteronormative thinking. That it's because of straight people that they marginalize gay and transgender people, right? That's always the strategy. And they separate people in categories, and they do it under the guise of empowering that culture so that they can come and overthrow. Now, and if you look at Russia and China, they started off pretending like they were going to help the worker. But think about Russia and the Soviet Union. Like I told you, tens of millions of people died because of the Soviet when they took over to willingly give you power. But in order to maintain that power, you have to have an oppressive force that keeps them down. And ultimately, the reason that the Soviet Union collapsed was because of the fact that they ran out of food and people were starving to death, and the resources were drying up because the idea that people would just work hard to help other people with no type of compensation goes against human nature. That's why I say all these things are strategies and they are ploys, and they ignore human nature. Because basically in Marxism, me working hard to make sure there's enough resources, not only for me, but for the other people in my community. But that goes against human nature. Socialism the same way. Because in this life, in this world, you should have equal outcomes. Equal outcomes, it comes to a place of oppression, right? Because what happens is you stifle the human, the human will. The human spirit is stifled because of that. And let me say this real quick, and then I'll get to these, and so I can bring this to a close. So, for instance, a professor did an experiment to show how Marxism/socialism doesn't work. So he said that everybody would get the same work, everybody would get the same material, and everybody would get the same grade, right? So initially you have a test or you have work. You always have you probably have 20% of the people that are hardworking A students that will push and do the best. Then you probably have another 20% of people that will either fail or just do enough, right? That's normal. That's how normally things work. But when you employ this Marxist ideology of equal outcomes, everybody gets the same thing, then what would happen eventually is those top people that were the same thing as somebody else. So eventually everybody gets the F or the D, right? Because nobody's putting forth the effort. That's what happens in humanity, right? So if you have a society, you have people like a Steve Jobs or somebody who will invent something to help make the world better, or Henry Ford who invented Ford, he started the Ford Motor Company, right? It made life easier because now you have the factories that were created to make cars, mass production, right? So those people work hard and they got compensated for it. But if you take away the reward, then what are these people going to do? They're not going to work hard. They're just going to do enough to get by. That's just human nature. That's how it always is. And so this whole idea of Marxism or equal outcomes always falls flat because they're ignoring the basic tenements of human nature. Now, let me give you something else. We talked about that critical race theory, we're on wokeism, and then we'll finish up with critical race theory because they're kind of similar. And so anyway, it's the same focus on race, gender, and sexual injustice. And the sad part about it is it's infiltrated the church as well. So now you have people in the church that are fighting for the rights of LGBTQ. They're fighting for women to have abortions and all these things that go against the actual scripture, because of these false narratives that are employed. that actually, because of propaganda, because of marketing, because of the human nature and how they have studied human nature in order to socially engineer things, they started things like a political correctness. So if you said something and they said it's deemed as racism, then you can't say it, right? If you're a racist, because if you say something, they'll say that's racist, and then they have this cancel culture that say you'll be canceled, you lose your job. If you have a TV show, you lose it. If you are a business person, they'll boycott your business because you said something, because they're trying to engineer language in a way to engineer thought, right? So now, because if you don't look at these and understand these underlying philosophies, then it's very easy for you to get deceived and you can fall right into the victim. And so we have even people in the churches that, instead of standing for the principles, the family values and principles that are espoused in the Bible, they are actually defending things that are fighting and defending. I say that we become apologists for what the Bible calls sinful, right? So you can't even say something sinful because they social engineered your language. And so they used to say if people were living together, not married, they used to say they're living in sin. But now you can't say that. So they say they're cohabitating, right? A person who was a homosexual or in a homosexual lifestyle, they used to say homosexuality, but now they say it's an alternative lifestyle. I heard a person describe them as same gender loving people, right? Because that sounds a lot nicer. When you social engineer the language, it makes these things, and I did a radio program not long ago, they're social engineering things to where it's now going to be called, instead of pedophilia or pederasty, it's now going to be called minor attracted persons, because they're social engineering the language to make these things more palatable, and eventually it will become accepted by the greater society. Just as the Roman Empire said were abominations throughout. And so wokeism is a term that was created. It was originally created back in or used back in the 1940s, but then it became more prevalent in the 80s, and now in this has become very, very more widely used. And what they say is, if you are not part of the social justice or social justice warrior, even in the churches, the emergent church movement is one that focuses on social justice. The majority of Black churches have been hijacked to the place where they are now social justice warriors, and they're focusing more on social justice than the message of the gospel. And so the emergent church and because of that, that's where identity politics comes into play. Because of social justice, Black people now identify primarily with liberals and the Democratic Party. And so now we go along party lines instead of looking at the principles, especially in the church. We're supposed to be standing for biblical principles, but instead of that, we are standing along with this social justice movement. Now, promoters of the wokeism are progressively theologically liberal on issues like LGBTQ, the environment, and racial inequality, and they see themselves as social justice warriors. And wokeism is made possible by postmodern thought. And as I said before, in German idealism, that's how I tie all these things together. Postmodernism, German idealism that really says that things only mean what they mean to the person using them. There's no kind of like absolute truths or postmodernism that goes against absolute truth. And up until the mid 20th century, Enlightenment and modernist thinking was still dominant, as evident from the ministries like the Francis A. Schaeffer Christian faith. But postmodernism cannot be better explained than by Jean Edward Veith. Now, we're talking about critical race theory. We're talking about wokeism. So they're telling you that if you don't line up with their beliefs in these issues that we're talking about, whether it's racism, whether it's climate change, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's abortion, if you don't line up with their critical theory driven philosophy, they will say that you're woke, right? You're not woke. If you don't, if you're not down with Black Lives Matter, they'll say you're not woke, right? If you say that homosexuality is a sin, they'll say you're not woke, right? And they tie in race with sexuality and gender roles. And Edward Veith Jr. In postmodernism, the intellect is replaced by will, reason by emotion, and morality by relativism. Reality has nothing more than a social construct. Truth equals power. indeterminacy, and a distrust of all universalizing worldviews and power structures, universal truths valid or all people. Instead, individuals are locked into the limited perspective of their own race, gender, or ethnic group. It is Nietzsche in full blown. If you're not familiar with Nietzsche, you might want to look him up. But think about this, like when we're talking about wokeism and how they frame language in order to frame thought. If you're Black, for the most part, and you aren't Democrat, they'll say you're not woke, right? Somehow or another, if you're not for these issues, then somehow or another you're not woke. But that's a deception that's done by framing language, by promoting this idea of critical theory, also in a nutshell, critical race theory. Now, here's the hypocrisy in all these type of things. And again, I'm quoting this person, George Edward Veith. Although postmodernists, and I'm putting all these different critical theory, critical race theory, wokeism into this, it falls under the umbrella of postmodernism. And I'm putting them all clumping them all together in this conversation for the sake of this conversation. So when you hear me say postmodernism, that's what I'm referring to. These wokeism, critical race theory, LGBTQ activists, feminists that goes against the toxic masculinity or trying to promote this idea of feminist, and you'll see this it's becoming more and more prevalent, especially the Black woman. So when you think about Black women, you got critical race theory and the feminist movement all wrapped up into one, right? So worshiping the Black woman, she's right all the time, believe the woman. These are all part of that critical theory thing. It became prevalent. And for the record, I do know women have been abused and mistreated. People of color have been mistreated and abused. But this whole idea that you just believe the woman is part of this scheme in order to tear down men, right? To emasculate men, to really have them being like they are constantly the victimizers. They're always wrong. All these things. In a relationship with a man and a woman, the wife always has to be right. If she fusses, you have to apologize, and you have this whole idea of if mama's happy, everybody's happy, right? You gotta always please the woman. So that's kind of this philosophy that's being employed. So anyway, let me read this, and then I'm going to wrap this up. Although postmodernists tend to reject traditional morality, they can still be very moralistic. They will defend their rights to do what they want with puritanical zeal. Furthermore, they seem to feel that they have a right not to be criticized for what they are doing. They want not only license, but approval. Thus, tolerance becomes cardinal virtue. Under the postmodernist way of thinking, the principle of culture to be considered as good as any other culture. The postmodernist sins are being judgmental, being narrow-minded, thinking that you have the only truth and trying to enforce your values on anyone else. Those who question the postmodernist dogma that there are no absolutes are excluded from the canons of tolerance. The only wrong idea is to believe in truth. The only sin is to believe in sin. Postmodern thought gave up on these pursuits, abandoning theological and intellectual precision, the inherent need for redemption. Now, one of the things that I'll say, and I'm bringing this to a close, is it's so hypocritical for these people, postmodernists that don't believe in absolute truths, and they'll espouse that. My question, first and foremost, if you don't believe in absolute truths and you say there are no absolute truths, my question is that statement true or not? But most importantly, that that people that have a certain worldview, traditional worldview, they want their opinion accepted and heard, but yet they feel like other people don't have the opportunity to give their opinion. That's where you get this cancel culture from. Anytime someone goes off their plantation of thought, they get canceled. This lady from Disney, Gina Carano, or whatever her name is, she espoused a difference of opinion and she got fired from Disney. Now, she's a good actress and she was a very good athlete. And why should she not have the right to give her opinion? Many conservatives on college campuses get shut down. They call them microaggressions because they say things that go against this whole narrative of wokeism. Understand where they come from, because at the end of the day, it is the strategy of the globalists, but you should always have your eyes wide open so that you don't fall victim to their schemes and devices. This has been Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. To you. Until next time, peace and blessings to you.